All right, so great news. We have a new poll that has just dropped from Pennsylvania, from Suffolk University. And it's a great poll because it has deep, deep crosstabs. So we can look really into the crosstabs today. Now, you might have seen the top line number already of a 3-point gap, but those numbers actually might be a little bit better than you think. So we'll get into that poll later in the video because that's what most of the video is going to be about. But at the start of the video, there is a new Big Village poll that I want to look at that shows Kamala Harris with a pretty decent lead. I think it's 51% to 43%. So we're going to go into the little bit of crosstabs I have and talk about why this poll is a little bit of a problem. We're just going to talk about this one really, really quick. And then we're going to move on to the Pennsylvania poll because, wow, there's a lot that we need to talk about with that poll. All right, so as we see with the Big Village poll, we see right here that Kamala Harris is up 50.5 to 43.4 amongst likely voters. Now, they did adults, registered voters, and so on. Now, I'm going to explain why I think there are problems with this poll. The first one is essentially all of these crosstabs are possibly garbage. And the reason why is all of these crosstabs are of all adults. So not even registered voters, not likely voters. And how do you know? If you look at this number, which is 1,007 male voters, you add 1,002 female voters, you get 2,009 voters total. So that's significantly higher than the registered voter number or the likely voter number. So that means all adults. So essentially these crosstabs are kind of useless as far as trying to analyze the election because it's just looking at all adults where a lot of adults aren't registered. And if they are registered, a lot of them don't go out to vote. So these crosstabs can be very deceiving. So I don't even know if we should look at them because if you look at this crosstab, Generation Z, that's much closer of a number than it should be for Kamala Harris. If you look at Generation X, my generation, it's a lot more Republican, but showing Kamala Harris with what, a 14-point lead or a 13-point lead here. I mean, it's really, really off. So these crosstabs in this Big Village poll just means they mean absolutely nothing. Now, there is one thing that I would like to talk about. First of all, this is likely voters. That's fine. Another problem is, maybe it's not a problem, but it's just kind of maybe a little bit of a tad concern, is it seems like these numbers are weighed quite a bit more than I expect. So obviously, having weighing in a poll is not a problem at all, but one of the problems I think is if you weigh too much when you don't need to necessarily weigh too much. This tells me that they didn't do their screening correctly or they're just in the process of really learning how to poll. You shouldn't have to weigh that much in something like male and female. Usually you're going to weigh, I think, for more underrepresented groups. This just shows me that you got your screening and your sampling wrong and you're trying to adjust it, which, I'm not going to really say that's a penalty or anything. People have to do it sometime. Now, the other thing that I want to mention with this poll, the Big Village poll, is with the trends in likely voters, you see Kamala Harris constantly going up. Now she is at 50.5, and this is 2%. So if it's 51, she would have almost had a majority. Now, let me go ahead and reiterate from my last video. There is a majority of the vote. So if you win a majority of the popular vote, that means you win 50% plus one of the vote. And of all the presidential elections that we've had, Samuel Tilden is the only one who has won a majority of the popular vote and has lost the Electoral College. Grover Cleveland, Hillary Clinton, Al Gore, they did not win a majority of the popular vote. They won a plurality. They were under 50%. So this is why I say if Kamala Harris can always be over 50% and outside the margin of error, this is a really good trend for her. Now, if we look at the Republicans and we look at Donald Trump, we can see that his numbers are just kind of going all over the place. So they're not stable. Overall, I'm not a huge fan of this poll because of the bits of weighing they have, and they're just giving us the crosstabs for adults and not likely voters. There's no reason why they shouldn't give us the likely voters tab. So this, take this for what you want to take it for. I don't, put much into this poll. All right, so let's get to the Pennsylvania Suffolk poll. This is the one that a lot of people have been talking about online, on the news, everything, because it is showing a positive trend towards Kamala Harris. Now, it is a sample size of 500. It is a 4.4% margin of error, which means she is still within the margin of error. Anyone can win the state, but the trend is going in her direction, and she is getting very, very close to being popped outside of that margin of error. And actually, she actually might be with more voters outside of that margin of error. We'll get into that because there is one top line that is extremely impressive. And if that's true, which I believe it is, Kamala Harris has the state more in the lock than you actually think. Now, before we get into this poll had 500, but they also did two other counties. They did Erie County and Northampton County, very, very close counties in the 2020 election. The thing to know about those polls, and we're just going to look at the top line of those polls, is those polls were done individually. So we have the statewide poll that had a sample size of 500. Each of those counties had their own individual polls dedicated with 300 people as the sample size for those. So it wasn't that they just took these two counties from the main state result. No, these are totally separate polls. Now, I'm not going to get too much into them because I don't know the intricacies of Erie County politics, right? If I did, I'd maybe go into them, but we're just going to go at the top line. So let's go ahead and delve into what we have for the Pennsylvania poll by Suffolk. Now, of course, as I mentioned here, we have the top line vote here where Kamala Harris has 49% to Donald Trump's 46%. Again, that is within the margin of error, so it basically is tie at this point, but Kamala Harris is very close to pushing outside of that margin of error. Now, if you look at male voters, and this is why we can really determine that the poll is kind of legit, male voters are at 53 to 41. This is about the distribution that you should expect in the state of Pennsylvania, whereas when we look at female voters, we see that they are more likely to support Kamala Harris, 56 to 39. So these are the age distributions that we should expect in many national polls, but definitely in Pennsylvania. It goes with what other polls and exit polls have shown in the past. All right, so if we look at white voters, this is about what we expect. Donald Trump with 51%, with Kamala Harris at 44%. So this is about the gap we should expect. This goes with previous exit polls and other polls that we've seen. So this is likely where the electorate is. Now, on the other hand, if we look at Hispanic voters, which can be 5 to 7% of the electorate, we see Donald Trump up 50 to 42. Now, if this ends up being the case, this is a momentous shift for Donald Trump. And let me go ahead and show you the exit poll from CNN in 2020 compared to what these results are, and you'd see how odd of a shift it would be. Now, if you look back at the exit polls in 2020, Joe Biden absolutely devastated Donald Trump in this number, 69% to 27%. So the Suffolk number that we see of Donald Trump winning this group of electorate just does not make sense. And if we actually adjust this in our poll, it actually could probably give Kamala Harris another 0.5% or maybe even a percentage bump, because we are talking about a drastic difference in what the reality will probably be versus what the poll says. So if we look at independents in this poll, we see that Kamala Harris is up 43 to 38. This is always a good sign for Democrats. If you can be up amongst independents, this could be your tilt in the state of Pennsylvania. All right, so let's go ahead and look at moderate voters, and we can see Kamala Harris is doing quite well with them. But if we compare her to 2020, we can see that they're both about the same. So we're not really seeing any movement in the moderate vote. But remember, Joe Biden won the state, so just making it stable and stabilizing the moderate vote definitely will help Kamala Harris win the state in November. All right, so now we're going to get into some of the deeper crosstabs that we have. And this one is about how excited people are to vote and how excited they are in this election. As you can see, of those who are very or somewhat excited, Kamala Harris voters are at 93% in that metric. On the other hand, Donald Trump voters are only 85%. So that's an 8% gap. And if you're a campaign, you're sitting there going, I want the most energetic, active voters who will do whatever it takes to go out and cast their ballot. Doesn't matter if it's snowing, raining, there's a meteorite coming down. I want to make sure that our people are coming out. So Kamala Harris being number one in this metric really shows that her voters are possibly way more motivated than Donald Trump. And obviously Trump's people are going to be motivated as well, as we can see. But that 8-point gap is a big difference in a state that can be determined by a whisker. So this is a very, very good number for Kamala Harris. But there's another number that I think is even more important that we really need to delve into, and that is of debate watchers. Now, we're not going to look at who we think won the debate, but of those people who actually watched the debate, what their vote is. So let's go ahead and look at that number. So if we look at those who watched the debate, Kamala Harris actually is winning this group 51 to 42, 9%. Now, that is outside of the margin of error of 4.4%. What's most important about this too is two things. One, 87.6% of the sample, the original sample, the 500 registered voters, watched the debate. So this is a very, very high number, which means the margin of error for this group is probably just very, very slight. I think it was 438 of the people in this poll actually watched the debate. So that's big. So the second thing you want to think about is that if you are watching the debate and you're in that huge percentage who did, chances are you're more likely to be a super voter or somebody who is actually going to go out and vote on election day. So this number of her actually up by 9% of people who are way, way more likely to vote. It also shows that the remaining percentage of people who didn't watch the debate are more likely to go toward Donald Trump and are more likely to be voters who are not possibly going to vote. That explains the enthusiasm numbers or the excitement numbers that we saw earlier. Now, I was going to look at non-voter numbers from previous elections, but unfortunately, the amount of data they have for that is so small that it would just be statistically insignificant and wouldn't even make any points at all. But these numbers, this debate number and the excitement number, shows me that Kamala Harris is actually probably doing a lot better in the state, at least by a percentage or two, than the original poll shows. Again, as I've mentioned in other videos, a lot of Trump support is buoyed by people who are passive supporters or passive voters, something like this, and these polls seem to be bearing that out. So the last polls I want to talk about are the two individual ones that they polled individually, which is Erie County in the far northwest, and then Northampton County, which is out east, kind of a little bit away from Philadelphia, north of Philadelphia, but still in that region. So we're going to go ahead and look at what the results were in 2020 and then see what the polls are saying now. So let's go ahead and start with Erie County, Pennsylvania. And as you can see, that was basically 49-49. I think the Democratic candidate, which was Joe Biden, was up by like 2,000 or less than 2,000 votes. As you can see, Kamala Harris now has a 4-point gap. Obviously, this is within the margin of error, so it could be tied just like 2020, but the trend is in the correct way. Now, if we look at the Northampton poll, we see that Joe Biden won by 0.8%, and as you can see here, Kamala Harris is up by 5%. Again, that is within the margin of error, so it could be tied, but as I mentioned before, the trend looks really good. So at the end of the day with this Pennsylvania poll, we have to look, yes, it is a 3% gap, but that's kind of including everyone, okay? Once we start breaking it down to people who are more likely to vote, such as debate watchers, those who are excited and whatnot, the poll looks better and better for Kamala Harris. Now, that one poll that we saw of her with the debate watchers, which again was 87.6% of the entire group of respondents, showed her with a 9% lead, which puts it outside of the margin of error. To me, that's the biggest number. If she's winning that much, that shows that a lot of Donald Trump support in this poll, or at least not a lot, but at least a significant margin moving percentage of it are voters that are maybe more passive, didn't watch the debate, have no interest, and will just say, I'm voting for Donald Trump. These are very good numbers for Kamala Harris. All right, that's all I wanted to talk about. Get into these deep crosstabs. This Pennsylvania vote is really, really good. Again, if you like the channel, please subscribe. It'd be great to have you on. I do videos every day about numbers and other things. Hopefully, in the next few days, my audio and everything will get better as I will be back in the United States from Paris. But thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day wherever it is you are, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.